What's up, YouTubers? Today we're going to talk about the McNees Performance Machine MAC2. McNees customized, Jonathan McNees designed the McB and the 3-inch blade. This is the 3.5-inch MAC2. Did it beg to be a 3.5-inch blade? Yes. Medium large hand. This one fits perfect. The 3-inch was a little bit small for me, so again, medium large. For super large hands, this may be a smidgen short. Out of the gate, obviously it's buttery smooth fidgetiness. I'm gonna do this a little bit different. I'm just gonna show the comparisons between the 3-inch, just so you can kind of get an idea of, should I go for the 3-inch or the 3.5-inch? And then we're gonna go into a little bit more traditional, but even that's gonna be a little bit different. I'm gonna do a tip to tail instead of just kind of go over pros and cons and some of the specs. So in terms of comparisons to the 3-inch blade, obviously, or the 3-inch knife, the 3-inch versus the 3.5, you're going to end up with obviously a ½ inch more blade. It is actually thinner blade stock. The 3.5-inch uses 3.6 millimeter stock, and the 3-inch uses 3.8 millimeter. And it is in fact ground a little bit higher, so you definitely end up with a better slicer. It's not a massive, great slicer. This is not the Swiss Bowie, but this is a very good slicer, and it did perform better than the 3-inch one. So that out of the gate is kind of the first thing that I noticed. The thumb studs on this, if you take a look at the 3-inch right here, you'll notice that those have a little stepping on them. Let me try to get this out of there. But yeah, there we go. You can see that stepping on there. The 3.5-inch does not. Instead, it utilizes basically the bead blast texturing that is on the handle, and I actually love it. It doesn't need anything more. Plenty of friction there, just enough. Super comfortable. You can literally sit there during an office meeting, of course a remote one, but we would never do that. And you can flick this thing 100 times on mute, in a minute, and it's marvelous. So definitely one of the differences there. Everything did translate really well. The next really change that I noticed was on the pivots. If you take a look at the 3-inch blade here, that one actually is, I believe it's press fitted in. I did not disassemble this one and do any maintenance on it, but it's basically flat on that side. And then you have your, obviously, your T8 for the release side over there. The 3.5-inch, however, has what you think is basically a usable T8, but do not do that. If you ever have to do maintenance on this, mine was press fit in and definitely would not turn. And I do actually show it in a disassembled state, not the entire disassembly, but I talk about it disassembled at the end of this. I'll go ahead and add that on to the end of this video. But we have this nice matching over here. So I really like that. It kind of gives it a uniform look. But again, if you are going to disassemble this, do it on your clip side. So those are the principal differences. You end up with a better slicing blade. Again, the 3-inch, a little bit tight there. You can still do it, and it's a little tanks for sure. But for me, the 3.5 really sealed the deal. So again, I think the short of it is, the end of this is, if you had a little bit larger hand, want a little bit larger blade, and you can go above 3 inches. For me, the 3.5. By the way, they're essentially the same price. So yeah, as far as that goes, really just like this. Oh, and there is a little bit more space, obviously, because of the blade for your deployment. Those thumb studs are not crammed up as much to the frame there. So that's kind of the end of what I'm going to talk about the 3-inch. We're going to jump into this 3.5-inch one. In terms of some comparable blades, for me, I've got a whole bunch, and these are kind of price similar, carry similar in-hand features, so I'm going to kind of be bringing them in, each of these other ones in, for a little bit of a view. So the first one that I really thought a lot about is the comfort in the hand, is the V-set from Les George. And again, this is a 3.5-inch blade, full tie, and also this one does not have a this is an example of a knife that locks up perfectly, does not have a lock bar insert. This one does not either, but I don't find a problem with that. You can see those blades, same length, but obviously you have a much shorter handle here. So that's definitely one of those. The V-set does, however, run on phosphor bronze. One that kind of I felt similar about was the Redención Chavez, made by Riot. That one has a smidge over 3.5-inch blade, full tie. Bulkier. That one's definitely bulkier in the hand, but they're definitely both on bearings, so they got that nice fidgety action. And one of the other things that really on this one I kind of liked a whole lot is if you take a look up at where the lock lock interface is, you'll notice you have this nice curve here. And it doesn't just have a flat slab that ends right there. You know, for example, the VSEP, basically flat slab. In fact, the Chris Reeve in Cosi, flat slab there. So that's very common, but that's one of those things I really liked about this. Again, definitely a cool thing. Another comparison knife. Again, you're in kind of similar range, and this one is about 350, I think, for the full tie there. The hinder, the blade stock is much more similar to the skinny, so I'm going to go ahead and compare the skinny in this particular case. Again, blade length the same. You obviously have a longer one there, but the hinder skinny is definitely skinnier in the hand. So in terms of the hand feel, that one's not quite as comfortable. You get the thinner blade stock, which this one has. That one's a smidge thinner. I want to say that one was 3.5 against the 3.6 millimeters. But it's not quite as comfortable in the hand, especially if you need to bear down in a hammer grip. Just not the same. You know, it has its advantages. And then the last one is, again, the Chris Reeve and Cosi. This is the Insingo blade, but I think, of course, the drop point or a Sabenza. One of the things that I really liked in terms of this comparison is these both have a textured titanium. I think Chris Reeve put some sort of something on theirs, but if you like that handle and it's kind of a chalky feel, this one is similar, not as aggressive, but just enough of that chalky feel to give you a grip so that even if it gets wet, it's not going to be overly slippery. So you get a lot of the great things. Let's jump into the tip to tail on this knife. This knife is, again, it weighs 4.4 ounces, costs about $500, and has 20 CV super steel, so you got no problems with that. The heat treat was magnificent on it. I cut and cut and cut. This is all I carried for 3 weeks, and I did a ton during the Christmas time and after as well. Did fantastic. The fidgetiness is great. Let's jump into it. The blade shape is very useful, very common drop point. It's got some flat belly and a decent tip. It's not the super pokiest, which I kind of like that. You know, it's just really nice. Very kind of a common thread in terms of that goes. It's got I will say, some of the cutting here, it actually picks up some of the junk. I did some drywall here, and it actually picked up some drywall that I wasn't able to get out without jamming on it too hard, so didn't want to do that. I gave this one lots of love, though. Nothing wrong with that. We talked about the thumb studs. They got great texture on them. Jimping's just fine, not overly aggressive up there. If you press real hard, you can definitely get a little bit of that on you, but you know, generally speaking, in the saber grip there, not a big problem. Like I said, that's kind of a little bit exaggerated there. In a hammer grip, perfect. This thing is marvelous in a hammer grip. Like I said, I went through some drywall, and it just did a really good job. The lock bar interface does not have a steel lock bar interface. I didn't have a problem with that. In terms of an over travel stop here to prevent your frame from going past, the clip works fine for that. I really never had a problem with that. I mean, if you're going to be laying out $500, you're probably a nice guy or gal anyway, and you know about that, not to jam back your frame. So didn't really have a problem, and like I said, I think there's enough of that provided there. So that's really good. Like I said, one of my complaints, and I did write Jonathan, he wrote back, is I just felt that this is a little bit small of a stop pin, but again, I can tell you with certainty, I have flipped this thing not less than 3,000 times over 3.5 weeks, and there's been no difference in the lock. The lock interface has not changed at all. It's kind of, about what, 30% there, 40%. It has not changed one bit. So I think over a lifetime of 100,000, 300,000, I fully believe that it's probably not going to be a problem. And again, unless you're like batoning on this and trying to cut through wood, which would be kind of stupid with this knife. I don't, in the end, it's one of those where, yeah, it doesn't need to be overbuilt. It's just fine. And I've had no problems with it. So that's a really good thing. Again, I already talked about, really like the fact that the lock kind of goes around there on that pivot. It makes for a nice look. Pocket clip is very functional. What I liked about this is it was very easy for putting in one-handed into the pocket. I think the bill was a little low, so that one of the ironies is kind of I won't call it a bad fit and finish, but I will say that it was not flush to it, and you can hear this. So it's not perfectly flush. You can see a little bit of daylight there. it didn't bother me because the fact that the bill was a little low, I don't know if that was by design or not. That was not the case. I know I said I'd put it away, but I did not have that with this one. It was flush. But I didn't mind it because the fact that the bill I thought was a little bit low, and had it been fully flush, you lose that last little bit of distance and it becomes a little bit tough to get that right over your pants there. So in the end, it worked perfectly. Got a nice scuff there, and you can see the way that that blasted titanium is going to wear off. Not a problem. I love it. I love the way this thing is wearing. Super fidgety. Like I said, it is just butter smooth, this thing. I just love it. Yeah, it's after the full disassembly, I will say this much. It did not change in performance one bit. If anything, of course, it just made it a little bit better. I was able to clean out some gunk and oil it up fresh. On the inside of there, I will say I was a little bit surprised. I don't know if it's a weakness or not, or a con, but it did not have stainless steel or steel of any kind washers to go in between the bearings and the titanium. So there was just a small race, and you'll see that if you watch the end part with it disassembled. I don't really find a problem. I don't have a massive problem with that. I guess I know in the end, yeah, okay, titanium wins out against steel wins out against titanium, and it's going to wear that, and eventually you're going to end up with a blade with play. Or, well, I don't have that yet. And this, I got to tell you, the number of threads on the pivot screw was amazing. I literally did feel like it was a hinder in that sense. I want to say there were probably a good 12 or 13 threads on there. It was just marvelous. So I really love that. This is one of those, you could take this out. I was actually able to flick it open, not a problem. And with it press fit in there, you could literally lose that screw. I'm not saying that I would run it long like that, but you could without a problem. In fact, I ran it with just the pivot in before I even put the barrel spacers and these screws back on when I reassembled it. And the thing was nearly dead centered and ran perfectly. I was impressed. So that even if you lost these screws back here, you know, you'd run just fine. Let's move towards the back of here. I think these are just barrel spacers. They're not receiver nuts or anything for the screws here on the show side. The show side screws actually just go straight into the titanium slab on the other side. Is that my preference? No. You know, I definitely do tend to prefer to have the screws go into some sort of central thing. You know, just because you're going in there, and if you ever do make a mistake doing maintenance, you know, hopefully you won't. You just don't want to mess up. Be careful on that. Not a super problem, but it's not a preference there. The one thing I would say is I think it's a smidge ugly. And if I were to say, hey, I know a way to really improve this knife, instead of just popping a hole through there like so many knives do for a lanyard. I am a lanyard dude, and I kind of like them, especially on small knives, or if you're going to let it float in the bottom of your pocket. I would rather just have that be solid material, put a spacer in there, just like this one up here would be just fine. Just give me a little pin right there, put it in between those two. Boom, you tie your lanyard right in between those two barrel spacers. It's not going to rub up against your blade, and you've got a perfect lanyard hole that's hidden, and you get to cover that hole up. So that's my one and only complaint on this knife. Like I said, well, I will show it was nearly perfectly. It might be 1/2 of a millimeter off center, but like I tell you, after utilizing this thing, picking up tons of dust, and really just banging on it for a long time, taking it apart, putting it back together, it came together exactly as it was. Buttery smooth and marvelous. Oh, last thing, again, you'll see it if you watch the end part, but it's milled out really well to keep this weight kind of down. You know, 4.4 ounces, not super light, but it's not super heavy. This is not a 1/2 pound sort of knife. So overall, I know it's been a long one, but I got to tell you, after carrying this knife for 3+ weeks, using it primarily, it cut and cut and cut. In fact, I haven't really shown a cut on here. Well, let me just grab a piece of like some cork. So it slices nice and thin. This, like I said, I was surprised when I tore apart some boxes how well this did. In fact, let me. So one of the things that knives often have a tough time with is double thick cardboard. We'll just kind of show an example of it. This one, not perfectly, but you can see that it goes through that double thick there really well. That was not the case with the 3-inch one. That's the difference of that higher grind on a thinner stock, making for a better slicing knife. So yeah, overall, obviously I'm gushing about it. Really love this knife. if you were on the fence about it, you know, it's this, the 3.5 inch is absolutely the deliverance of you know, nearly perfect carry EDC, relatively small. I will go ahead and show one last thing, probably the smallest of them in terms of length, in like in pocket, for example. This one is, you know, nearly 3/4 of an inch longer. So this one, there's just no wasted space here. That's what I love about this. As far as a carry, it's really, really good. But you also never rub up against that tip there, in the back there. So it's there's no safety sacrifice here to get this thing fit in your pocket. Great. One more can I say? If you're thinking about one of these and you're on the fence, is $500 a lot? It is. Is this knife worth it? Yeah. Having handled many knives, this one is everything that it promised to be. You know, it had the greatness of the things in the 3-inch, and it just extends it really, really well. So it's marvelous in the hand. So hope you did enjoy this. If you did, hit like and subscribe, and have a great day. Take care now. So a couple of things I want to point out on the disassembly of this one. All you need is a T8 Torx for both the pivot as well as the 2 back screws there, that just go through. Basically, this is just an open. I'll get that on camera. These are basically just kind of like open barrel spacers. They're not threaded. It actually threads into the other side of the scale. One of the things to note, I was concerned that it was going to be a free spinning pivot, but I will say it does appear as though the back side, the actual pivot, was to some degree press fit in, because I'm not going to force it out, but it definitely did not spin when I tried to loosen it. And in fact, I can't even push it out with a decent bit of force there. So it does, you know, the pivot, like I said, whether it's press fit in there and permanent, I don't know. The things to kind of point out here that I would say is it's using steel ball bearings, which is probably better than ceramic, because what I would say is on these race channels here where the bearings ride, there was not a steel washer in there. So that race that's formed there is straight into the titanium. You know, definitely worthy of note. You see there's lots of milling going on here. Overall, does it, you know, really diminish my perspective on this knife? No, maybe some things possibly in the long run could be impacted, but otherwise, very simple disassembly. I'm going to go ahead and put it back together and then complete the full review.